Hello, my name's Jorb. I love gear, and this is the Create Audio West Pest. It is a semi-modular monophonic synthesizer with sound generation based on some of the most important building blocks of West Coast synthesis, namely a wavefolder and a low-pass gate. If that is all new terminology to you, West Coast synthesis is most often associated with Don Buchla and his designs in Buchla synthesizers. This is in contrast to East Coast synthesis, primarily associated with the designs of Bob Moog. East Coast synthesis is way more common, and most likely, if you're into synthesizers, that's the subtractive synthesis that you understand. And speaking very broadly, West Coast synthesis can be characterized as more experimental. There are oscillators, there are filters, and there are envelopes, just like East Coast, but the way you control them might be a little different, the terminology might be a little different, and just the way they're presented on the panel might be different. Sometimes people will say the difference is filters versus wavefolders. That's totally an oversimplification. There are filters as parts of designs in West Coast synthesis. And while wave folding is specific in a lot of ways to West Coast synthesis, wave shaping in general is not. Adding harmonics to a wave that weren't there to begin with is not exclusive to West Coast synthesis. Anyway, I'll talk more about wave folders and harmonics when we're actually working with the synthesizer, but Buchla stuff is still in production, and it is cost prohibitive for a lot of people. Lucky for us, in this golden age of hardware synthesizers, there are options, not so many, but there are options for relatively affordable, self-contained synthesizers that take inspiration from West Coast design elements or West Coast ideas. But almost all of them are either more expensive or way less feature-rich than the West Pest. At just $249, available right now from places like Sweetwater. I have an affiliate link in the description. The West Pest is really, really hard to beat if you're curious about West Coast or curious about embracing some of those ideas. But just like its slightly more conventional counterpart, the East Beast, this little was designed in cooperation with Pittsburgh Modular. It comes with its own patch cables. It can be eurorack mounted and powered. It accepts MIDI and has a built-in sequencer along with a lot of other really actually quite deep control features. Also, just like the East Beast, Create Audio sent this over for me to take a look at. So Al, really sincerely thank you again. But Create, or Al, doesn't pay me anything to do this. The only people that pay me are my patrons. So thank you for your support on Patreon. Anyway, this video is about the West Pest. I'm going to step through all of the analog modules, explaining how they work, explaining the sort of sounds you can expect to get out of them, and then I focus on the control options in service of exploring West Coast synthesis, or maybe, let's say, embracing the ideas of West Coast synthesis, because the control options really do let you do that. And I bring this up now because in the East Beast video, I spent a little more time, let's say methodically, going through the controls or options for patching. And if you're trying to use this video as a manual or as a guide or for tips, you might gain something from watching the East Beast video, even if you are working with the West Pest, because their control sections are, by and large, the same. No more exposition. Let's make some noise. Here we are with the West Pest. I have it running through a Digitech Digidelay, just for a little bit of ambiance, into an FMR RNC, really nice compressor, just to ease out some of the dynamics, make it easier for me to mix straight into the camera. That's into my Tascam mixer, and that has an aux send to this oscilloscope. So that's everything that's happening here. If you've seen the East Beast video, this stuff will be familiar, but the way you control this, other than the knobs, of course, these buttons over here are a keyboard most of the time. You can change the octave here. Already it sounds pretty good, doesn't it? You have a clock that runs your arpeggio and your arpeggiator, and your sequencer. You control it with that tap tempo here, but that also doubles as a modifier. So for each of these two modifiers, there's white and yellow on the West Pest. You hold one and then press the corresponding keyboard key here to change that option. So you're going to see me do that a lot. But let's start just with the oscillator waves. And the first thing we're going to see is a sine wave. Higher so you can hear it if you're on a phone. And you know what? I'm just going to focus the camera on the oscilloscope for this part. Just a sine wave. So to change the oscillator waves, we talked about those modifiers. I hold the yellow modifier and then press oscillator wave. And you see the lights here change to reflect that. Okay, and now we're on a triangle. And one more, we are on a sawtooth. Great, and just like the East Beast, we can also do some combination wave. So here is sine and triangle. I really like that. This is sine and saw. I really, really like that. Man. Then triangle and saw. Very profit. One more. We have all three of them lit. That is a noise. Sort of pitched noise. Cool. I'm going to get back to the sine wave because it's the most useful for showing our next module, the wave folder. So, and this is where the sort of east-west discussion can really begin in earnest, because often people will say that I'm out of focus. Because often people will say the difference between East Coast and West Coast synthesis is, oh, in East Coast synthesis, you're using a filter to cut back harmonically rich waves. And in West Coast synthesis, you're using a wave folder to add harmonics to waves with less harmonic content. In some ways, that is true, and I'll show you how that works, but it's also an oversimplification. So let's start with just wave folding on a sine wave. This is probably one of the easiest ways to see it. And again, I'm going to focus the camera just on the oscilloscope, so pay attention there. So here's our unaffected sine wave. Okay, and when I change volume, our peaks and valleys get further apart, so to speak. Our wave gets taller. The amplitude of our wave increases. Okay, and if you fold that wave, visualize sort of limiting headroom at the top and the bottom of this wave. Okay? And as I turn up fold, any part of the wave that makes it beyond that headroom gets turned back in on itself. Okay, and if I go all the way to the bottom again, it comes back the other way. If I can get the scope to show just a single cycle of the sine wave and then I fold it all the way to the maximum. Weirdly, it ends up sounding kind of like a square, because it has those distinct rough edges, but it also has characteristics of a really, really resonant filter. Wavefolding is a totally unique way to add harmonics to waves, and to me is one of the most exciting parts of the West Coast style synthesis, we so nebulously refer to it as. Great. I'm going to focus back on the panel of the synth here. Okay, so wavefolding works better on slopes. It doesn't work great on abrupt waveforms. That's why we don't see a square wave here. But let's listen I'm going to do a clean sweep like a filter sweep, but with the wave folder of our sine wave. Just such a cool way to change the sound. Now the triangle. Those are pretty similar, right? Which makes sense because their starting point is pretty similar. But if I go to the sawtooth, which is sort of unconventional for a wave to be folded, especially on its own. Again, has some of the shared characteristics, but does end up sounding a little bit different. Awesome, and just because we're being thorough, let's do the combination waves. All pretty similar, and here's noise. Really sort of behaves strangely. So back at the sine wave, here we are. And of course, that fold amount isn't static. We can modulate it. So by default, it's routed to the LFO here. I'm just going to turn up the LFO. You see that light blinking a little bit faster. And I'm going to increase the fold mod. Awesome. We'll come back to that a little bit later. But let's move on to the dynamics controller. So if you're familiar with East Coast synthesis, this is a combination VCA and VCF. And here on the West Pest, the implementation includes control over your release or your decay, if you want to think of it that way. So as soon as I hit a note, we're triggering the dynamics controller. This is all the controls at minimum. So just a little bit of release, or a little bit of decay in this case. And if I increase the sustain as I hold a note, we'll stay at that level. And if I increase the release, even with no sustain, that will ring out. That's all really conventional, even if you've only ever experienced East Coast synthesis, because it is really the exact same thing. So it's called the Dynamics Controller here. I know there's a Buchla module called the Dynamics Manager, which is for low-pass gates. I know the Buchla easel has low-pass gates that you can switch between being a VCA, a VCF, or both. Here on the West Pest, those are always paired. So your volume and the cutoff of your filter are always controlled by the same amount here coming into the Dynamics Controller. What I think is a little unique about this is a release control. As far as I understand, low-pass gates in old Buchla stuff, they had a sort of natural decay or a natural release based on how they work. They were built around a component called a Vactrol. And a Vactrol is something that generates light combined with a light-dependent resistor. And so when you send it a gate, that light bulb or that LED will light up, and then naturally, as that voltage goes away, it won't snap immediately off. That light will sort of fade away. And so that becomes the natural decay of that low-pass gate, is the light bulb turning off, the LED slowly becoming dim. But here, we have a variable release control. And I do believe there's a way for a Vactrol-based low-pass gate to have variable release. I imagine it would involve feedback or a ringing of some sort. I know this doesn't use Vactrols, and so that makes me think that this release is just a traditional envelope, but I'm really not sure. All I know is I'm happy that we have that control. Anyway, that goes on to, this isn't really a complaint, it's just a comment. I know a lot of West Coast synthesizers do have function generators or envelopes that are more traditional or include an attack stage. I think that would have made this way more flexible if we had an attack stage as well, or even a way to invert this. Certainly not the end of the world. I wish I had more control of a function generator other than the LFO and this single decay stage. Let's keep talking about what we can do with the dynamics controller, though. We can modulate it. Speed up our LFO. If you listen close, especially with something with harmonics to cut off, and you can hear it controlling, that is the volume and the cutoff of that filter. Cool. Okay, and we know it's a normal filter because this resonance control isn't part of the waveform contour, really. It's part of the dynamics controller, or at least the filter half of it. Let's get more harmonics in our wave here. But that sounds like any normal resonance in any East Coast synthesizer. Cool. Okay. Not much else. We have glide for our oscillator. Which lets the pitch slide into the next one. We'll leave a little bit on. And our LFO I've shown you in a few places. I haven't shown you FM on the oscillator. The LFO goes really fast. And that's so fast. To get to really, really complex sounds, I guess. Great, and I want to talk more about how this connects to my idea and my preconceptions of West Coast synthesis. So I do think that, yes, the two things that myself and many people first associate with West Coast synthesis is wavefolding and low-pass gates. But there's a lot more to it, and I think audio rate modulation is a big one, and the LFO going extremely fast makes it possible even on a one oscillator piece of gear. Our our filter cutoff or our dynamics controller. Or our amount of wavefolding. The results of all three of those are really complicated sounds, really rich sound. Great, so those options for audio manipulation are here, making this feel more like a West Coast synthesizer. Not that they aren't part of the East Beast, but the way they're implemented here and sort of, I guess the context, I'll say, makes me think of them differently, because yes, there is audio rate manipulation of all these things. Anyway, another element of West Coast that I think is completely essential is randomness. And while it might not seem like you have options for that at first glance, you can implement that in a few ways. We go deeper with the controllers. So the first and maybe the most versatile and my favorite is the multi-mod. So if I take this multi-mod out, and what if I run it into the pitch in? So our multi-control or multi-modulator can do a few different things. If I tap through, I hold yellow and hit multifunction here, it can be a MIDI CC translated into a voltage. It can be a clock sync to LFO. It can be random values synced to the clock, or a simple decay envelope. Let's start with random values. Great, now that pitches are random. And if I hold down our gate here, we can hear it. Or I can find something to hold the gate open. So if I plug the gate input into, I don't know, the oscillator out. We can just hear those random voltages. I definitely wish there was a way to attenuate that random voltage, but that element of West Coast is here in this very unassuming package. And let's just route that somewhere else to the fold mod. We have this sort of rhythmic pulsing part of it, and I'm adding some delay now. Again, with just one patch cable and thinking about these things like I would think about a West Coast synthesizer, this really does have a lot of options. So, I showed you that multi-modulator to the pitch, but there is I don't want to say it better, there's a different way of implementing randomness to your pitches. So if I hold yellow and turn on the sequencer, you can see that that light is now lit up. The notes will play back in the same order that I played them in. Or those same notes can be selected from randomly by holding white and pressing random. You see that's lit up now. Already, randomness. I can clear that sequence, of course, or I can generate a random pattern, and I need to pull up the manual to remember how this works. But I can generate a randomized pattern, 1 to 32 steps, with or without rests, and with or without pattern morphing. So if I hold the white, press S generate, that generates a random sequence. That just generates a random sequence. If I hit it again, it'll make a new one. But if I hit it twice really quick, then it'll generate a random pattern that might include rests. Let's do it again. There's some rests. And if I hit it so that it lights up the first and the third here, that's a random sequence that changes over time. Great. I don't know how much of that I showed, but I played with it for a very, very long time. And another way for us to implement randomness, we can change our oscillator waveform to change randomly. So if I hold white, press the same button as oscillator wave, every time I press a key, it'll randomly select one of the oscillator waves. Does that work with the sequencer, you're asking? Yes, of course it does. So we have all these ways of introducing what I see as really, really valuable randomness, which, again, when it's on the East Beast, it's like, oh, man, that's cool. But here on the West Pest, it feels like a really essential part of being a tiny little representation of West Coast synthesis. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, thinking of this as the sum of its modules and ignoring the controller part, this is less standalone than the East Beast because it's a little less flexible. But combined with the controller and combined with the multi-mod, this is a very, very interesting way to explore West Coast synthesis ideas. And to be more specific about those ideas, wavefolding, low-pass gates, randomness, and audio rate modulation. I think all of those are essential to the West Coast idea. I would take criticism that, maybe you left something out or maybe you're overemphasizing this or that. But I think, without a doubt, those things are essential in what makes West Coast different. And so embracing them here really makes this come into its own a little bit more than just focusing on the modules. I made a conclusion while I was on the table, and I don't like it anymore. So I'm making a new one now. The first time I sat down to try and learn the West Pest, immediately I thought, this isn't very much. Just a wavefolder, really simple low-pass gate. They really sound good, and they give you controls that make a lot of sense, but I wanted more. And when I think of West Coast, that includes things like a complex oscillator and slew limiters or function generators with an attack phase, randomness, or in Buchla terms, sometimes called a source of uncertainty. All those things is sort of what I was hoping to see in a West Coast-inspired synthesizer. But over the course of a few hours sitting and using it, I realized that the control section covers up a lot of that ground, makes up in a way for a lot of that ground. The multi-modulator in really every way, but especially the random functionality in this context. The sequencer having generative or random options are really, really valuable options. And then, because it's eurorack compatible, plug it into anything else. And if you think of it in that context, in the context of the combination of modules that this would be if it were eurorack, this is an incredible value proposition. If you just want a good wavefolder, and this is a good wavefolder, you're already looking at within $50 of the cost of this entire package. And you have a good oscillator, and you have a low-pass gate, and you have a good sequencer and really, really deep control. I dare you to get equivalent functionality out of anything in eurorack that's, 4 times the cost. It's really, really an amazing value proposition. So huge credit to Create, huge credit to Pittsburgh for that. So there you go. The West Pest sounds super good and is probably about as cost effective as you're going to get a complete synthesizer at all, let alone one with such rich control options, let alone one that has a wavefolder. If you're curious about wavefolding, this is probably the most cost-effective way to do it. Or a low-pass gate. This gives you the opportunity to explore those things without breaking the bank, and it sounds super good. I don't know how anybody could say that isn't a compelling value proposition. So again, Create, great job. Pittsburgh, great job. My name's Jorb. Thanks for watching. I'm going to plug this into my eurorack. It makes stupid noises all night. Thanks for watching. Cheers and so long.